Hi everyone, Daljeet Peterson here from astrolab21.com. Now this video is going to be a companion to the last video I did on the chart of Vladimir Putin. And I thought it would be interesting, and I had some suggestions in the comments that maybe we should explore the chart of Zelensky sort of in contrast or in comparison to the chart reading we did for Putin, which I think is an excellent idea. Right, and what we're trying to do with this practice and this approach is to just sort of understand who we're dealing with on a soul level, right? Because that's the approach that I prefer to take when I do chart readings. I've always talked about it as being the blueprint of the soul, and so what we're trying to get is a perspective on these individuals and try to see what is making them tick, so to speak, astrologically. From a soul perspective. So we'll do that. I thought it was interesting. I learned a lot just by going through that process. My opinions and understandings of Putin the man were certainly informed by that inquiry. And so I'm really curious to use that same process to examine the chart of Zelensky in the same way and to see what we can learn about him and his character and the evolution of his soul. But before we jump into Zelensky's chart, I did want to just sort of do a little wrap up on what we did on Putin's chart, because, and I'll put a link to that video here and in the description below if you haven't had a chance to watch it. Because what came up when I was doing his chart was it was apparent that there was going to be a major significant transit occurring on April 4th, earlier this week, because I saw that the conjunction of Saturn and Mars in Aquarius was going to be in exact opposition to his natal Pluto. And when I was in astrology, you see this kind of transit, that's a major inflection point in the life of an individual, particularly someone with Putin's status as a world leader. That Pluto, as we looked at, being in his 10th house, Pluto and Leo, authority, leadership, being opposed by Mars, Saturn, and Aquarius, this energy of resistance and rebellion to the status quo. And as I was watching the news on Monday, on the 4th, what had happened was on that previous day, on Sunday, the Russian forces had retreated from their assault on the areas around the capital, around Kyiv and the suburbs. And we started getting the first images of, of the civilians who had been, their hands tied behind their backs and apparently shot at point blank range, execution style. Probably some of the most disturbing images we've seen so far in this invasion of Ukraine since it started back in late February. And so, for the first time, we are hearing words like genocide and war crimes. And of course, it just alerted me when I think about that constellation of archetypes that transit triggered. Pluto, Mars, Saturn. Those are the very constellations that you would associate with something like war crimes, and I'll show you that in a minute. Let's just jump into it, and I'll just refresh you guys on what we talked about, as I was calling this Putin's date with destiny, because I think that very much is what that transit was triggering. And we talked about how the Mars-Pluto was the conjunction with which the invasion began on February 24th, and the qualities of that. This was Mars-Pluto Capricorn, right? And then we were looking at this week where Mars then had moved into a conjunction with Saturn and Aquarius, and how that was a much different energy than what we were under the influence of when the war started. That Mars-Pluto, very aggressive, very warlike, and I think what Putin and the Russian army, expected was a very lightning blitzkrieg-like assault on Ukraine, and that it would topple within days or a week at most. And that was the energy with which they initiated this assault. And it didn't play out that way. There was a lot of resistance from the Ukrainian people and the Ukrainian army and government. And so now two weeks down the road, a much different energy was being constellated. Now Mars was joining Saturn in Aquarius. And so a lot more resistance and challenge to that Mars aggression, that warlike energy, different than its conjunction with Pluto. And so this was what I was looking at in Putin's chart as being significant. And here we show the Mars-Pluto combination in Capricorn, and I think this is very indicative of the Russian invasion force and effort, right? It was the combination of Mars, which is the warrior, right? Aggression, use of force, willpower, right? The initiative to really move into a very quick lightning strike. And it was Pluto, right? Which is this very destructive libidinal force. And within Capricorn, and Capricorn to me, when I look at what's going on with, Putin and Russia and that sort of authoritarian government style, it's very much a Capricorn style or approach to governing, right? It's old school, it's authoritative, it's law and order, ruled by Saturn. It's all about security. And that's a word that comes up a lot in the discussions around Ukraine with relation to Russia. It's a security issue for Russia. It's the last country as a buffer between Russia and the West and all those NATO allied countries. And it's been very interesting to see how Russia sits on the Security Council of the United Nations and has veto power over anything that the UN Security Council could do to penalize Russia for this incursion. Very interesting in that language and that understanding that very Capricorn body too. The UN has that sort of Capricorn structure to it. And I think that's coming under a great deal of stress, strain, and challenge as we're moving from Capricorn into Aquarius in so many ways. We've been talking about that transition from Capricorn, the top-down, authoritarian, patriarchal, hierarchical way of organizing society, and we're moving into Aquarius, which is a bottom-up, peer-to-peer, networked, sort of egalitarian model. And we are very much in the throes of that transition. It began with that Jupiter-Saturn conjunction in Aquarius at the end of 2020. Pluto ending its time in Capricorn and will be moving into Aquarius in 2024. And then sort of the bigger sort of era we're in as we're moving into the Aquarian age. So it's a very prominent archetypal transition that we're moving through. And I think as I look at this, Capricorn is very much Russia and the old world. We talk about Putin being more of a 19th century type of mind. Compare that with Aquarius, and I think I would associate the Ukraine and Zelensky and all of that more with an Aquarian model, right? It's more of a egalitarian, sort of a fellowship of the citizens. It's a bottom-up type of, freedom-fighting type of energy. And it's an incredible contrast between the two, and it's something I think it's interesting to observe. The Aquarian model feels much more 21st century. The Capricorn model feels like it's old world, 19th century ways of viewing the world. And that's very much what we're into. And so this shift was what occurred over the last couple of weeks. And I just want to bring up Pluto here within Mars and Saturn, because this is what we're demonstrating in Putin's chart. His natal Pluto opposite Mars and Saturn. And as I said, you couldn't get a more appropriate complex of archetypes to describe something like war crimes or genocide, right? Mars as the planet of war, right? Pluto as the planet of destruction and crime. Saturn as the planet of rules and law and order. This entire complex is what you would get with, war atrocities, genocide, and the like. And then the limits of Saturn, the rule of law coming in to condemn such kind of behavior. And so I just thought that was so interesting, and I wanted to just bring that up. This is why I think astrology can be super insightful and useful. And you see how, as I always remind you, it's one of the reminders we get from the astrologer Richard Tarnas, who wrote Cosmos and Psyche. He always makes the point that, astrology is not concretely predictive, it is archetypally predictive. And so when we have an archetypal complex like this, we could predict things of that nature. And then often the concrete evidence does bear out in many ways as we look at the transits that take place in the world. So pretty interesting to look at this. Now, as we jump ahead, I want to talk about Zelensky. And with this chart, as I look at it, I feel like I'm calling this the role of a lifetime. And I think it's very interesting that we're dealing with a man who, as an actor, portrayed the president of Ukraine, then became the president himself by virtue of that role that he played. Very interesting character to look at, and so it's going to be fun to look at his chart and see some of these things playing out. But one of the things that we'll look at and will be very striking in contrast between Zelensky and Putin is they are of two different Pluto generations entirely, where you have Zelensky is of the Pluto and Libra generation. So what is this generation all about? They are really about balance, harmony, relationships, diplomacy, right? It's all about fairness and equality, Libra values, these sort of ideals of living in peace and harmony with each other. And if you just look at all these characteristics that Libra tends to exemplify, that's something this diplomacy, harmony, relationships, fairness, right? There's a sincerity and a grace to it, more reasonable and practical. Well, it can also be superficial. It can sit on the fence and be indecisive or insincere. It does have its shadow side. But in general, it's a much more aesthetic and refined and harmonious energy. Now compare that with the Pluto and Leo generation, from which Putin is a member of. An entirely different quality that you're getting here with Leo, right? This is this willfulness, this dramatic, enthusiastic, authoritative-like energy, right? It can be very, leadership-oriented or bossy, bombastic, strong-willed, pompous, snobbish, proud, right? Sincere, but domineering and conceited and impatient in the sense of the regal, right? Leo, the lion, versus Libra, the scales, right? This ruled by the sun and Libra ruled by Venus. So very interesting. And as we look at the chart of Zelensky, who is a Pluto and Libra, we're going to see that those qualities play out in his character and in the evolution of his soul in really sharp contrast to what we witnessed when we looked at Putin's chart as a Pluto and Leo, domineering, authoritarian, and we saw it was in his 10th house of leadership and rulership. We'll see Zelensky's got Pluto in his 5th house of creativity, of self-expression, of a dramatic presentation, the house of the performer and the actor. Very appropriate for him. So let's jump in and let's just look at Zelensky's chart, and let's do the same thing we did with Putin, is just start with the empty blank chart and then just build it up in terms of, as we call it, the outside-in approach, starting with Pluto and the nodes and seeing what manifests. So we'll just do that right now. We'll start with Zelensky's Pluto, and as I talked about, he's a Pluto and Libra generation. And when we talk about the Pluto placement, we always want to think of it in terms of its sign and its house. The sign it's in is the generational signature, and the house it's in is the more individualistic expression of that character within the individual. So we just talked about, so he's a Pluto in Libra, right, on all those qualities. Like, these are souls who are incarnating and have been working through these issues of relationships and relatedness, of fairness, of equality, of harmony, right? They are discovering who they are through relating into others, being in those dynamic relationships, understanding, listening, cooperating, compromising, being diplomatic, all right? They're discovering themselves through relationships. So Zelensky comes into the world as part of that generation. But how is he doing it on his individual level? Well, he's doing it in a fifth house way. And what is the fifth house? The fifth house is the house of creativity, of self-expression, of the performer, the actor, the theatrical, right? And also of leadership and authority. So, as we know, Zelensky's background is as a performer, an actor, a comedian, someone who played the role of the president of the Ukraine and then became the president of the Ukraine by virtue of playing that role. Very interesting story. And as we unpack this chart, you're going to see how that plays out quite accurately in the unfoldment of his blueprint, which is it just amazes me every time I look at this kind of stuff. So by nature, we would expect this person to be very connected and invested in his relationships, particularly those around creativity and self-expression. And that's what we found, is like he came to fame as part of a performing troupe. He had these relationships with other actors and performers. They formed this tight-knit performing group. They formed their own company, and they became massively successful by being creative and expressive and doing literally stage performances, theatrical stage performances. Fifth house. You really couldn't script that much better. Now, when we look at Pluto, we always want to look at it in terms of the first thing is the ruler of that Pluto is always going to tell us a little bit more about the quality of this soul and what it's trying to evolve through. So when we talk about Libra, we're talking about its ruling planet, Venus. So Venus is going to be significant for a person who is a Pluto in Libra. And so when we bring up Venus, we find Venus in Aquarius in the 9th house. So what is this telling us about Zelensky? Well, this is that he really values Aquarian principles, which are about being more progressive, about being future-oriented, scientific, technological, connected to society and the social movements, right? That peer-to-peer, egalitarian qualities. This is what you get with someone with a Venus in Aquarius. So he's a very sort of future-oriented, rebellious, innovative type of character. Someone who knows how to use technology, and as we're going to see, particularly communications technology, things like social media. Aquarius is a very, would be the default ruler of all things social media. And Zelensky has proven to be quite skilled at the use of social media. He used it for his business. He used it for his presidential campaign. He continues to use it as his main mode of communication directly with his population, with the voters, with the citizens of the Ukraine, and really with his messaging to the world, right? 9th house, the house of the world, the house of theory, of philosophy, of a sense of spirituality, of your vision, your worldview. He has this very sort of futuristic Aquarian worldview and values. He values that sort of grassroots type of approach to society. He very famously circumvented the traditional media outlets during his presidential campaign back in 2019, relying almost solely on social media in order to appeal to the voters of the Ukraine. It's very much a 9th house Aquarius type of modality. And with Venus there, he's very skilled at this. It comes naturally to him. He has that talent, that capacity. Again, as a Libra Pluto, you know, the aesthetics, the image, being able to convey a message through an aesthetically pleasing, harmonious, fairness, equality type of message. So this is sort of what his soul is very comfortable with, being in relationship, particularly creative relationships. And we look at that company that he formed with his peers and his colleagues, very tight-knit, and became incredibly powerful. They became wealthy and very famous based on that staying together in that group. Very interesting. Now, we're going to bring in the nodes, and it's going to tell us a lot more about this sort of evolutionary journey of this soul, starting with the South Node, right? And what we find is it's in the opposite sign and house of the natal Pluto, which is always a very interesting and significant pattern. And something of note, when we looked at Putin's chart, the exact opposite. He had the south node conjunct his Pluto in opposition to the north node. Now with Zelensky, we're going to see, and I'll just bring it up here because the north node is always exactly opposite. The south node, he has Pluto conjunct the north node. Inversion of Putin's energy. Very interesting as we watch these two men kind of come head to head on the world stage within this invasion in this scenario. Quite fascinating, actually. So what does it mean for Zelensky to have his south node in Aries in the 11th house? Well, this is an energy of go it alone, like the opposite of Libra. Aries is very independent-minded. It doesn't want to be bogged down with relationships. It wants to find its own power in and of itself. Very independent, very freedom-loving, very assertive, very aggressive, right? Aries is ruled by Mars. This is a very bold, courageous, initiating type of energy, Aries. Within the 11th house, within the social sphere. So someone who the soul over the course of many lifetimes has been exploring his independence and freedom of expression and trying to initiate new things within his social sphere, within his peer group, amongst colleagues, wherever he's operating. He's very aware of his impact, trying to have an impact on society, 11th house. And with this being in Aries, right, an aggressive manner, something new he's trying to initiate, and in very much a contrast to that Libra energy. So this is a soul, whenever you see the axis aligned with Pluto, these two archetypes are being battled out over the course of these lifetimes, going back and forth between being very independent-minded and being very codependent, needing relationships in order to discover himself, and then going back into lifetimes where he's very much an independent and wants nothing to do with relationships, right? This soul has been going back and forth. And of course, the goal of evolution is the integration of the two archetypes, right? One reinforces the other. That's why all of this elegant symmetry within the wheel of the zodiac, any two signs in opposition are complementary energies, and they need to be integrated in order to maximize and to promote growth and evolution. Now, with this North Node and Pluto together, that's really going to be the focus in this life. He's really trying to get the relationship element right. Harmony, justice, fairness, balance, these Libra qualities, and fifth house, creativity, expression, authority, rulership, pride, right? Very interesting. But we want to just complete the picture here and bring all the pieces in. So we want to also, to get a better sense of this South Node in Aries, how has he been using that energy of independence over the course of many lifetimes? Well, we're going to look to Mars as the ruler of Aries to give us a sense of how that energy is being used by this individual. And when we bring that up, we get Mars in Leo in exact opposition or close opposition to this Venus in Aquarius. Very interesting. And a very new, bold type of Mars energy. 0 degrees of Libra, or of Leo, and retrograde, right? There's something very new about this modality. This is giving him the energy, Mars, to be very confident and aggressive in pursuit of Leo-like things, which are creativity, self-expression, performance, theatrics, right? Leo is the sign of the actor. Leo is the sign of the leader and the ruler, right? Very much the same as this fifth house energy. Leo is the fifth sign, so it has a natural affinity with the fifth house. So this reinforces this fifth house Pluto North Node by having this Mars and Leo energy back here in the third. Again, Third house, expression, communication, dialogue, relationships. It's that natural Gemini house. So you can see all that air energy sort of combining in this character. Now, having Mars in exact opposition to Venus, right, forcing a harmonizing of now two different archetypes, Leo and Aquarius, right? The individual ruler versus the person who is connected to the betterment of the bigger picture and of society, a more socially oriented, that integration. And as a Libra soul, right, oppositions are very much a part of the Libra energy, because Libra is trying to balance and harmonize often opposing viewpoints and opinions, two sides of the coin, the masculine and the feminine, right? Venus and Mars. How do I balance those? Well, in this lifetime, Zelensky is really trying, his soul is trying to work out, how do I live in harmony and balance with myself and with others? How do I balance the needs and interests of everyone, Aquarius, in order to make everyone feel like they belong, right? And you listen to him speak, he always talks about the people first. You know, and whether you think that's just rhetoric or just his shtick, or it's truly, and he believes it, is he sincere? Again, look what we asked when we looked at that Libra graphic, right? Are they sincere or not? That is his message, for better or worse, which is perfectly plays out in this soul's desire to evolve if we look at this blueprint. And so what's emerging here is like a very specific energy direction, right? We can see, if we look at, you know, this Mars opposing this Venus, and then this Venus in this nice harmony with the nodal axis itself, we're already seeing the fundamental pattern of this chart. Now there's one more thing we want to bring in here, now that we've added Mars to the equation, which is in Leo. Well, Leo is ruled by the Sun. So Zelensky's Sun is going to play prominently in how does he express this energy, this Mars aggression to be a performer and a leader, right? That natural Leo instinct. When we bring his Sun into the picture, boom, exact conjunction with that Venus in Aquarius, right? This is a very significant placement. You don't often see, whenever you see two planets in a chart that are in such close conjunction, it tends to be the focus of the entire chart. And indeed, I believe this Aquarius Sun conjunct this Venus really is the key to this character. And it reinforces what we just talked about, this oppositional energy of a Pluto in Libra soul trying to balance and harmonize. So this is it. How do I balance my need to perform and to be a leader, Leo, right, that aggressive energy, with the need to be of service to the Aquarius, to the bigger picture, my individual expression, to be a reformer and an innovator and a disruptor that can bring my gifts to society, right, in a way that is aesthetically pleasing, harmonizing, diplomatic, cooperative, right? All those Libra and Aquarius qualities. So here we have, I think, the essence of this soul's evolutionary journey. And it really sets up quite nicely with all of these pieces here. This is this sort of evolutionary blueprint, or the schematic with which this soul is really working at a primary level. So everything else then just sort of reinforces this picture or gives us other insights into this. But this is the key direction for Zelensky. Now I want to bring up this Leo third house gets very interesting because he also has his moon and Saturn in Leo, right? So then this brings a more intense passion to this need, right? Wherever the moon is what we need to feel safe and secure in ourselves. So Zelensky needs to be Leo, to perform, to be creative and self-expressive, and to communicate and express himself, third house, to have information, dialogue, right? This is the house of media and entertainment, the third house. combined with the sign of the entertainer, Leo, the performer, and the leader, right? And it's so interesting with all this Leo energy. If we think about those two different kind of facets of Leo, it's at once, creative, as I said, the actor, the entertainer, the performer, very Leo-like qualities, but also the leader, the ruler, the king, right? And again, here's a man who acted the role of the leader and became the leader by virtue of the role he played, which is why I'm calling this chart reading the role of a lifetime, because really that is what we're witnessing with this man's life. And I think a lot of us, when we first heard about Zelensky back in 2019, it was, during the Trump presidency, when in America we had elected a reality TV star to be president, and we were maybe questioning the wisdom of that, and seeing now a comedian essentially who had played the role of the president on TV becoming the president and having no experience in politics or otherwise. And so that's a rather ambitious, and he sort of is very transparent about that he was the outsider candidate. And if you think about Mars, in this 0 degrees Mars in Leo, right, it's like there's something brand new about this energy. This is his first lifetime, I think, working through the role of a performer and perhaps of a leader. This is a very new paradigm that he's working through, which we know because that's 0 degrees Mars. That's something very new. And so it's very courageous, very bold, it's not risk averse, willing to take risks, willing to fail and make mistakes and learn as you go, right? And it's very much, I think, what we're witnessing with Zelensky's presidency. A very new leader, very young leader in a very young country, right? I mean, the Ukraine, as we know it now, as a modern nation state, only came into existence in 1991. It's one of the newest nations on the planet. So there's a lot of new energy, and I think he aligns with that desire to change and to reform, to be a reformer, to take on the oligarchs and the old guard and do things in new and disruptive ways. Speaking of disruption, right, we should bring in the planet of of Uranus, which is the ruler of Aquarius. So the ruler of this very important point, as we're discussing, the Sun and Venus in Aquarius, is going to be Uranus. And here we have Uranus in the 6th house in Scorpio. And so this is a symbol, of whatever Uranus is. It is sort of the process of individuation for any individual in the Jungian sense, right? How do I discover and become my own person? Separate myself from the sort of the rules and regulations of the culture with which I'm born and discover my own individual expression. It's about liberation. It's about disruption. It's about freedom, as Jeff Wolf Green called it, freedom from the known. Freedom from Saturn. Uranus and Saturn are very much opposite sides of that coin, whereas Saturn wants to limit and suppress and keep us within the contained rules and regulations of society. Uranus wants to break free of those rules and regulations and discover its own way, be rebellious, be innovative, be Promethean. We always consider the myth of Prometheus is closely associated with the archetype of Uranus. So here we have, and I think this is very interesting, in the 6th house, right, which is the house of humility and service and duty and obligation. The show in which he played the president of the Ukraine was called Servant of the People. Uranus in the 6th house, right? So, and that became the party platform that they created and ran on. So they are the Servant of the People Party. Uranus, 6th house, Scorpio. I mean, you can't write this stuff, right? So that's interesting how that's playing out as the ruler of this 9th house sun in Aquarius, right? Bringing that sort of service and Scorpio, which is all about power. It's all about power and the lack of power, right? In both the 6th house and Virgo naturally, and the 8th and Scorpio are all about lack. They really are the archetypes that are most attuned to what is lacking and then how to compensate for that lack. Virgo finds the lack and wants to do it by means of self-improvement, right? That's why Virgo, or the 6th house, is all about the house of improvement. I could do better. I can find fault and I can see where I can improve. Self-improvement, self-help, those are all 6th house types of activities. Scorpio in the 8th house, it sees lack and it solves it by finding it in the other, by forming relationship through osmosis, being in relationship with that which I lack. Then I become empowered by it, right? So this is a dynamic of power and powerlessness and trying to innovate and disrupt the power dynamic, right? I think that's very much a Uranus and Scorpio energy, is disrupting the power structure and innovative, bold, creative, future-oriented, progressive ways. Okay, so someone who has his Sun and Venus in Aquarius is going to have a lot of Aquarian energy. This is going to be very much a factor in the chart. We see it's squaring that natal moon, right? And so this is going to really agitate and disrupt him, his comfort, that security he gets from being the performer, from being the natural leader, right? And it's interesting in his biography, within that group, that troupe that he performed with, right? 5th house Libra, the troupe, he emerged as their natural leader, right? All of this Leo energy as having leadership qualities, particularly within a creative endeavor, right? And now we see how that Uranus squares that natal moon. It's a very volatile and excitable and changeable, impulsive type of individual. He's always going to need to be sort of pivoting a lot and very unpredictable, very erratic in a lot of ways, hard to pin down. And I think his campaign in 2019 really came out of nowhere. It was a very just sort of sudden and just, you know, within the matter of a year, he was going from playing the president on TV to being the president. Very, very interesting, right? Now, I want to bring in the fact that he is a Gemini rising, right? So here's, again, the performer and the faces of the theatrical, right? Gemini can play that role. And I think it's interesting, this duplicity, right? Gemini risings tend to be very demonstrative, very creative, very expressive, very communicative. There's a sort of youthful energy that they have. Gemini in the twins is associated with, you know, youth and with communication and expression and wit and humor. Again, the perfect sort of mask for the performer to wear. And he also has Jupiter conjoined in that rising. So this is a big personality, someone who has the capacity to make an impact on the global stage, someone who can communicate a message in a way that is powerful and transcendent and uses, you think about the internet, the World Wide Web, right? It's very much a Jupiter in Gemini type of modality. This is someone who embodies that and just sort of wears that as his personality. And it's interesting, you know, Gemini also is associated with duplicitousness and being, you know, two-faced or speaking out of both sides of the mouth. Is it authentic or not? It can be fickle. Does he really want to be president, or is it just another role he's playing? It's just another creative endeavor, right? And it's interesting. I wonder, is he an actor playing the role of the president, or the president playing the role of an actor? Interesting question, and it's hard to know. Of course, I think he is genuine in his intentions. I don't quite. The more I learn about the man, and when I look at his chart, I think there is an authenticity to all of this. I think this is his destiny, was to take this route to leadership. And I think it's interesting, he came from a family where I think his father wanted him to be in some very serious profession. He did study law in university, but fell into entertainment because it was his nature, right? You can't help but think that this guy he wants to perform, he wants to be creative, and I think he's bringing that attitude and passion to the role of the president, despite being young and inexperienced and maybe making a lot of mistakes, right? Mars, that 0-degree Mars, and that that Aries energy in his south node. That's why I think he's very comfortable. He's been initiating new things in society for many lifetimes. So it's very easy for him to step into something that's brand new, and for him to go, "I've got this," and to have the confidence and the courage to really be bold and audacious. Mars, Aries energy, and to have the confidence in himself, a very self-confident individual, not afraid to fail, because he knows he's going to learn along the way and has a lot of confidence, right? Leo is a very confident sign. Can be the downfall, can be very full of hubris and overconfidence and pride and arrogance, which we'll see if that manifests in his character or not. But right now, the world is sort of latching onto this image of him as the hero. And I think I had this picture. Yeah, this is pretty interesting. These posters that are coming out. As I say, is this an actor playing a president or a president playing an actor? It's just very interesting, and this is such a complex image. Bringing up a century of war in Europe here. Where you're looking at some of that imagery. It's recalling images from World War I, and some of the the old wounds that are being revived. What did we talk about? Inflaming old problems, right? It's the energy with which we're sort of working through right now. So very interesting to look at this chart. A few more things to bring in here just to fill out all of the planets. If we bring his Mercury into the picture, Mercury in Capricorn in the 8th house. This is someone who has, despite all this fire and air energy, right? I think this grounds him and makes him a very practical, matter-of-fact, plain-spoken type of individual. And he does seem to have that direct appeal, to be able to speak plainly, matter-of-factly, and with a certain gravitas that he has. Despite being young and inexperienced, he really has carried himself quite impressively through this whole situation. So that Mercury in Capricorn gives him that sense of the authority. He speaks with authority. In the 8th house of trials and tribulations, of difficult, crucible-like events, transformative events, trials, tribulations, this event. And I think about his language about, his commitment to stay in the Ukraine. A lot of the Western countries wanted to evacuate him and bring him to safety, and he refused. And he said, "This is what I'm doing, in my words and my actions. I want to lead by example. This is what I think the Ukrainian people should do." It was very much a Mercury, Capricorn, 8th house type of message to send. And it's, squaring his natal Pluto. So we've got this cardinal square between air and earth. Again, I think it adds a weightiness to his character, in terms of how he presents himself. Because, otherwise that Gemini and Aquarius, all that air energy, right? He's got a lot of air, could be a little flighty, a little ungrounded. And so I think this may give him, his mind is very grounded in that way, something very practical about him. Neptune in Sagittarius in opposition to that rising sign, right? So this gives him a sort of dreamy, transcendent, poetic quality. I think a sense of the heroic too in Sagittarius, like this sort of savior the guru, the wise one, someone who has wisdom beyond his years, and is tapping into a narrative and a myth of his philosophy, which is ninth house Aquarian, which is all about equality. And just bring back, I want to show you his sun in Aquarius, right? If you think about what that constellates, the sun is his identity, his expression, his life force, his vitality, his individual expression, taking on this very egalitarian and freedom-loving and innovative and disruptive and rebellious energy, right? The progressive, the reformer, the revolutionary, using technology and the scientific methods in order to break down the paradigms. Again, someone who is using social media and technology to in such a savvy way, right? And I think that gets to the Libra and the Venus also in Aquarius. It's really just the perfect sort of symbol for his character. Lastly, we'll just bring in Chiron, which is interesting. It's in a square to this Mars, Venus, Sun configure opposition, so it's forming this T-square, right? And so wherever we find Chiron, it tends to be, sometimes it's the Achilles heel of the chart, it's the wounding, right? So with Zelensky, perhaps there's some secret feeling of inadequacy, of not being good enough, right? In that 12th house, this hidden feeling of Taurus, that he's just not physically capable. But I think, maybe he's overcoming that. The Chiron symbol, the wounded becomes the wounder and the healer, the wounder or the healer, right? So maybe he has some healing capacity to bring to the values and resources of this country by channeling it into this very powerful dynamic. Remains to be seen, but that sort of is all of the chart. Just bring up his midheaven just because we see that in Aquarius as well. So this is someone who's oriented, I feel like, less as a leader. I think his ambitions are less personal. It's not about, he's very different from what we saw with Putin's chart, right? Who has all that Pluto and the 10th house, right? Leadership and about himself, empowering himself, very important. Feel like with Zelensky, I think there is a genuine desire to be much more of the reformer, the renegade, the innovator, the disruptor, someone who is showing us the way to the new. And that's all sort of tied into this 9th house Aquarius and having the midheaven there as well. Also, you see that grand air trine, right? So someone who has this capacity to spread a message, right? That's an air trine, right, between the 3 air signs, to really communicate. Sorry, my phone's ringing. A vision of a future that is bold, and to say, okay, we can cooperate, right? You think about all of the energy that is being constellated by this air trine too, right? Gemini, Libra, Aquarius, the message, the air, the ideas, very future-oriented, very creative and expressive. And I think he brings in the willingness to compromise, the willingness to negotiate, the willingness to be the diplomat and the bigger person at the table. He keeps challenging Putin. Sit down with me. Let's negotiate. Let's talk about it. Putin refuses, despite him also being Libra, right? He has all that 12th house Libra, right? He's more about the hidden and the backdoor negotiations. He doesn't want to negotiate publicly with Zelensky because I think Zelensky would probably come out in the court of public opinion. He would be a much more persuasive person. And just in conclusion, maybe that's something we should look at is let's go back to Putin's chart. And as we talked about, his Libra here, all in that 12th house. He's got the South Node and Pluto in the 10th of the authority and the midheaven. He's really about authority and power and empowering himself, I believe. But what happens when we put Zelensky's chart over Putin's chart? And this is something we do with a comparison or composite chart. And it's very interesting. And I'll just briefly touch on a few of the salient features of this. So here we see Putin's chart on the inner circle, and we see Zelensky's planets as they align over Putin's chart. A couple of things that are really interesting. Zelensky's Pluto in Libra is exactly conjunct Putin's natal Saturn in Libra. Pluto, Saturn, right? So his claim to leadership, authority, right, is being challenged by the disruptive, innovative, transformative energy of this young Pluto in Libra character. Likewise, Zelensky's Saturn conjoins Putin's Pluto in Leo. So Pluto, Saturn, Leo, Libra, right? Those are I feel like that's a key to the conflict, this clash of personalities, this clash of leaders, this clash of the world, the old and the new, right? Russia, Putin, very much the old world. Zelensky, the Ukraine, this young nation trying to be born, and really stuck between a rock and a hard place. I mean, you know, Ukraine is that last buffer between the West and Russia in the East, and is in a very difficult position politically, historically, and geographically. So as the president of the Ukraine, this is a very difficult role that this young man has stepped into, but seems to be playing it. It's an Academy Award-like performance to this point. So, yes, it's so interesting, and I'm wondering, I'm open to other insights and what others see in this chart. We could really start to unpack this and go into a lot of detail. We could spend hours analyzing a composite chart like this, but that's kind of what I wanted to discuss here in this particular video. You know, it's a good sort of compare and contrast, and again, it gives us insights into the character of these two men, these two leaders, these two humans, these two souls who seem to have a date with destiny, to have met on the world stage at this moment in time under the qualities of this time, right? So we always talk about with astrology, the quality of time. And so the quality at the time they were born, as it relates to the quality of the time we're living through now, and what each of them is bringing to that table, what each of them is trying to evolve through their own personal evolution of their soul's journey. It'll be very interesting to watch how this plays out. Saturn versus Pluto, right? The old, the restrictive, the conservative versus this disruptive and evolutionary transformational power. And that's a very difficult, violent type of clash. There's going to be pain and suffering, death, loss. It's all part of the unfolding of those two archetypes. And so it's hard to watch. I don't think any of us would want to have seen this take place in the world, but it's happening, and we can understand why and how. And I think getting this sort of bigger picture helps us understand it a little bit. At least it helps me. I hope it helps you. I would love to hear in your comments what you see in these charts. I've been getting comments on the Putin video. Someone had pointed out about Zelensky's Aquarian nature and that being the end of Putin. I thought that was very interesting. If you have insights into any of these charts, either of these charts, or if there's more you'd like to hear about them, let me know in the comments below. And of course, If you're not already a subscriber to the channel, would love it if you would subscribe, hit the like button if you thought this video was interesting, share it if you think there's others who might find it enlightening. Yeah, well, until next time, Sat Nam, everyone.